This podcast is brought to you by True Resources, connecting talented people with the best mining employers in the Australian market. For more information, head to trueresources.com.au. So hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull podcast. I'm back for 2025 in a brand new studio and I can't think of a better man to start off this season or continuation of the podcast than the man himself, Tony Sage. And for those that are unfamiliar with you, your history in mining is second to none. And first time on my show and it's an honour. So welcome, Tony.
Thanks very much, Ben. Looking forward to it.
For those that may or may not know you, I went through your history and there's just countless deals and mining projects and successes. And I'm sure there was also some failures, as everyone does throughout their career. But if someone doesn't know who Tony Sage is, if we go back, how did it all start? What's your origin and history?
My origin? Oh, my God. Depends how far you want to go back. I was an immigrant, and a lot of people don't know that. So I came out when I was 11 with the parents, obviously, with a very varied background. My dad's English and my mum's Italian. So we lived 8 months a year in Italy, 8 months in England, 4 months in Italy every year. So that was different. So two languages. My mother couldn't speak English very well. My dad didn't speak any Italian, so they spoke French in their whole courtship. Anyway, we moved to Australia. We ended up in Adelaide, then Melbourne, then Sydney, then New Zealand, and then Perth. And then we were here 6 months, and then my mum and dad decided to go to Saudi. So my dad was in engineering, so he started projects and left. So I was 18 years old by myself in Perth. One brother got left in Melbourne, one brother got left in Sydney. I got left in Perth, so no relatives. 18, one good thing my dad did leave, he left a house that I had to look after. He said, Tony, you can have the keys to the house, but you're paying the rates, the taxes. So I had to get a job, went to uni, became an accountant, hated it. After 3 years, I got my chartered certificate, and then I saw a job opportunity in funds management, and that's opened up a brand new world for me. I was the accountant at the beginning, but then I ended up running some of the equity funds there. We started off in 1983 with $1 million under management. I had part equity in the business, and in 1996, after 13 years, we were $1.8 billion. It's not a lot in today's dollars, but back in 1996, it was quite big, and the two main owners decided to sell, and so I ended up with a chunk of money, 34 years old, ready to retire. My wife was having our first child, and she wanted to go back to work, and I said, great, and it lasted 3 days. She wanted to come home, and I couldn't stand being home with a baby for 3 days. So in my career in the funds management, being from Perth, what do you invest in?
Absolutely.
Mining. Yeah, so I became an expert in investing in junior mining companies. So my first venture was in 1997. I went to Romania. We found a 500,000 ounce deposit run by the government. We bought it off them. Within 3 years, it was 11 million ounces and 30 million ounces of silver. We sold it for a see-through value of 1.2 billion in 2000 to Newmont. We sold it because we didn't think we'd ever get a mining license, and it's now 2025 and Newmont still hasn't got a mining license, but they've increased the size of the resource. So it's the biggest gold mine in Europe, but at the moment there's no mining permit. But there's 16 million ounces of gold there. So if I was Romania, I would... given the economic difficulties they have there, I'd open up that mine and create a lot of jobs, but a lot of wealth for the country. So that was my first venture. I've done heaps. I've been in, 7 countries in Africa. I've been 3 countries in South America, Kazakhstan, Romania, Austria, Russia, Ukraine, Austria and Greenland now. So, I've covered the gambit, not only in jurisdiction, but also in commodities. I've done iron ore, gold, diamonds, copper, and more recently rare earths and lithium.
So that was going to be my next question, the smorgasbord that you've worked with. Did you find that there was more success during certain phases of your career with certain commodities? And what were some of the realities of going in at certain times and understanding that there's points where markets are pro-enforce certain commodities and
Yeah,
resources?
look, I think you've got to do a lot of investigative work. I had my first trip to China in 2005, and I'd never in my life seen as many cranes. I just couldn't fathom. Everywhere I looked, I went to Shanghai and Beijing, cranes. And I was saying, geez, they're building a hell of a lot of stuff here. They're going to need iron ore. I've not done iron ore before. So I came back to Australia, hunted around, found an iron ore deposit that Rio Tinto had discovered. Because it was magnetite, they weren't interested. They were pumping out their hematite. So I bought it for $600,000, raised $10 million, and sold it within 18 months to the Chinese for $400. That was Cape Lambert. That was the first big iron ore deal that I did. So when you're looking at a commodity, you find out who needs it, when do they need it, and more recently, lithium. So I got into the lithium market for the first time in 2016, and that went extremely well. Right now, what's the world need? I mean, China controls 97% of the world's rare earths. So I've been hunting for 2 or 3 years for a really good rare earths deposit, and I happened to find one in Greenland. So I suppose we'll talk about that a bit later. But yeah, so you've just got to find out what's needed, right? And it sounds simple. It's not always that simple. No one believed in the EV revolution, for example, back in 2016, 17, 18. And then it slumped in 18 and then it took off again.
Yeah.
I think it'll take off again because I've been to China more recently, and the Chinese are basically enforcing all big cities to have their whole fleet of buses and taxis electric. If they replicate that right across China, there's not going to be enough lithium in the next 4 or 5 years.
Well, and that's before you consider India and some of the other jurisdictions that you're on the border with.
Correct.
Astronomical populations.
And again, the Chinese have got the best long-term planning. They've cornered the rare earths market. They've cornered the lithium market. 80% of the world's raw lithium goes into China. They reprocess it. So they buy it off us.
They make it and then they give it back to us.
$1,000 a tonne for the spodumene, right? And they turn it into hydroxide and sell that right now at approximately 13 to 15,000. 18 months ago, it was 75,000. Right?
Yeah.
So they're very, very smart at doing that. And every time there's a new discovery in what they need, they go in there with a check. Whereas Western investors see risk, and they're not necessarily backing the juniors when they do make a discovery, whereas the Chinese do, and that's why they've got managed to take 80% of Chile's exports and 80% of Australia's exports.
Well, they've been incredibly strategic in acquiring this.
Correct.
Well before people understood the value of a lot of these critical minerals.
Correct.
And that's sort of what we're seeing now with that EV boom. So moving on from there, I should have said at the outset, you're the chairman of 4 different companies, 3 on the ASX, 1 on the NASDAQ, which is getting a lot of attention at the moment. And they accumulatively are about 1.5 billion AUD in market cap. And if I start predominantly on the critical minerals space, there's been a lot of talk, especially since Trump is now in office, and a lot of what he's doing and changing. And Greenland is kind of on the international map and a center of conversation. So for those that may not understand what's happening there, can you just talk a little bit about why this is suddenly such a hot topic in the news, and for people that have got assets or potentially stakes in that ground, it's quite an interesting development?
Yeah, look, you've just got to go back. What are rare earths? What are they used for? Basically, everything in the national defence category in the United States is rare earths are needed for. Musk, for example, can't send a rocket up without rare earths. You can't have a guided missile without rare earths. It's the rare earth metals, not rare earths themselves, but the rare earth metals. And over time, China's managed to corner that market. So right now, they control 97% of the world's rare earths market. And that's untenable. So given the potential trade war between China and the US, and Trump's been saying this for 8 weeks now since he's become president-elect and now president, tariffs. So the first thing the Chinese do is chop the sale of gallium. So
Gallium?
Gallium is a rare earth metal. Very, very important strategically for missile systems and rockets. And they just banned the sale. Now, there is stockpiles, obviously the US has got, but when that stockpile runs out, they won't be able to build it. Now, a little known fact, is that since World War II, more rockets, missiles have been sent in the last 3 years than the whole of World War II. So the stockpiles that the US had going to Israel, Ukraine, and all of the stockpiles that the EU had has gone to Ukraine. So they all need to be replenished, and they all need rare earths. Where are all the rare earths? China, 97%. So I've been looking for many, many years for a decent rare earths deposit. The biggest one outside of China, Russia, is in Greenland. It's called the Timezones project. I invested in that about 3 years ago, and the person was owned individually, wasn't owned by a company or anything, and he ran out of money again in last year, 2024. And I said to him, I said, we'll buy the rest of it. You can have shares in our company, because he knows how valuable it is. And that's how it happened. So now we'll probably be the owner of the largest rare earths deposit in the world, and sort of in the West. I mean, Greenland is in a very strategic position, hence Trump wants Greenland.
Yeah.
Right? Not only for the rare earths. I mean, there's so many strategic things he wants it for. If the Suez Canal, which is slowing down because of the drought, closes or something happens there, they need another route.
So a trade path as well.
It's a trade path. So I think they've got the biggest US base there anyway. They want another 2 or 3 naval bases. So strategically, as a land mass, very important. But second is the rare earths discovered already. And third is the potential for oil and gas. I mean, the Greenland government hasn't allowed for the drilling of oil and gas. And if Trump gets his way, he would like access to that for US companies. My personal opinion, the Inuits, the locals, and there's not many, right? Everyone says there's 50.
50,000. That's what it's on the news at least saying.
Yeah, 58,000 people in a size bigger than WA.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of it inhabitable.
Yeah, a lot of it's inhabitable. But of that, 30,000 are expats, and most of those are Danish.
Yeah.
So they're not locals. Really, the locals would only take up 24,000, 25,000 of the population. Okay? So they're fiercely independent. They want to be independent of Denmark. I don't think they want to be dependent on the US, right, as a state or anything, or a territory. What I think will happen is they will get permission from the Danish government to hold a referendum. Referendum will say that we want independence. Once they are independent, they'll say, right, Mr. Trump, what are you going to give us?
Yeah. Let's arrange a deal, get some cash into our economy and start exporting.
Correct. Because the Danes put in $500 million a year into the economy.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where they live off, because their only export really, 80% is fisheries.
So then your foresight to see this, again, 3 years ago, your first sort of discovery of it, but then before Israel and Palestine, and even probably the start of Ukraine and Russia, the rare earth elements, what was your interest and enthusiasm other than just the missiles? Or was it really just 2020 that the US was making more apparent that they wanted the Critical Raw Materials Act, or a few of those that were flying on the radar?
Yeah, look, I think it's twofold. Number one is when one country controls
The entire
97% of a supply, anything over 40 or 50%, if one country does it, you've got to look at the
aims. It's a global monopoly.
Yeah, you've got to look at the aims of that country. And look, China is causing ripples all around the world. Their Belt and Road initiative, which they tie up countries with debt, and those countries only find out about it a few years later. So you've got to look at their national security interest of the United States, of NATO, of the EU in securing these from other sources. You've got it. There's a nice deposits in Brazil being drilled out now. There's a couple in the US, but not enough to sustain the next 100 years.
Yeah.
And technology is changing all the time. I mean, you just saw something DeepSeek,
Oh, yeah.
which is very interesting at the moment. But all of these applications need chips, need superconductors. They all come from rare earth elements.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't have one country controlling it. So when I see something like that, I hunt, and I've been hunting for a long, long time for a decent deposit. What sparked my interest in Timezones, I knew Greg Barnes from a long time ago anyway, who owned it. He went and saw the Trump White House in 2018. And in early 2019, 3 months after he saw them, Trump first came out and said he wanted to buy Greenland. And that sparked my interest. So I've reached out to Greg. We didn't come to a deal back then, but 2 years later, he came to me. He said, look, you were interested, and I made a small investment. And then we took over the rest last year. But, yeah, so inevitably, no one should control 97% of one resource, whether it's minerals or whether it's anything else. Yeah, like in Taiwan, superconductors, 80% comes out of Taiwan. That's no good if you're trying to take Taiwan.
And I know the US has been trying to in-house it, but it's one of those sorts of battles. If someone's so far ahead, catching up, unless you're spending millions, if not billions of dollars on that construction development, you're already 5, 6, 10, 15 years behind. And that's what the semiconductor is seeing with Taiwan having complete control. And there's all the geopolitical tensions around Taiwan and China and what happens with all of that. But besides the point, this land area, this project in Greenland, I mean, talk us about the sort of size now that you have complete ownership of it, and what were some of the sort of indications already that there is something quite decent to explore here and start doing work on?
It was discovered actually in 1804. I mean, amazingly. And no one knew what it was, because it wasn't until the 1960s when the samples were redone in Denmark and in UK that they realised that we've got something special here. And then Greg Barnes, a leading expert in rare earths in the world, he's written many research reports. He bought the ground. His background is very, very colourful, but he made a lot of money in Africa himself as a geo. Not many geos do, but he did, and I think it was well over 100 million. And he spent 55 million of that developing this deposit. He's done 414 drill holes. He's taken 366,000 soil samples. He's taken a bulk sample, and he's given it to a couple of labs. So the data set is fantastic, right, to start with. It's 3 kilometres wide, 5 kilometres long. It's 400 metres deep.
Oh, wow.
It sits right at the edge of the fjord. And I don't know if you know much about glaciers. When they retract, they gouge out, and look, they've gouged out these fjords. So at the edge of the fjord, it's 80 metres deep. So you go 2 metres from the edge of the shoreline, and it's 80 metres. So a Panamax ship can come in off the North Atlantic, straight into the fjord, straight to our deposit, turn around, we fill the hold up, and send it straight out. We don't need to build a port. It's a floating dock, right? You know, those pontoons.
Yeah.
So the logistics,
accessibility is
the accessibility for that is fantastic. We're very lucky. The Danish government built an airport at Qaqortoq. Qaqortoq's 15 kilometres away from us. At the moment, logistics, it's not like a British colony. When you go to a British colony way back, they built roads and railways. None of that. Everywhere you've got to go in Greenland, outside of the cities, is helicopter.
Yeah.
Right, and which becomes very expensive, and there's a lot of fog in Greenland, so you could plan to go there and you're stuck 3 days until the fog lifts because the helicopters won't take off. So it's happened to me.
Speaking from experience.
Speaking from experience. But with that airport, it's fantastic for our deposit because we can fly people straight in, and it's just a quick boat trip to our site on the edge of the fjord. The other advantage of that is the construction company that is building the airport has got excavators, it's got asphalt making machine, cement making machine, a 300-man camp. They've made their profit. They don't want to demobilise all that equipment. So we're the only mine that's going to be opened in the next 5 years anywhere near there. There's nothing else on construction being planned, so we probably can get most of that equipment for us, saving us $30 or $40 million in capex. Buying all that. So we're starting to negotiate with that company now. But that airport will be open this year. So from now on, instead of the usual route, we go from Perth to Dubai to Copenhagen to Reykjavik, Iceland, and then 1 hour to Greenland, Nuuk. And then from Nuuk we go to Narsarsuaq, and Narsarsuaq we go to Qaqortoq by helicopter. That all changes now. We can go straight from Copenhagen straight to the new airport at Qaqortoq. So it saves hours and hours for all of our
staff, people wanting to get there and explore.
Yep.
Jeez. So Greg's done a fair bit of work, and now there's almost this. There's a fair bit of stuff to use that as the basis for the next stage of exploration. Now, I don't know what Greenland's policy or even permitting process is like, but what are the next stages now thinking about continuing exploration and potentially going towards that, mine operation?
Yeah, we don't have to do any more exploration work. It's all done by Greg. Greg's got a license to exploit 500,000 tonnes per annum, environmental approvals. If we had the money and we knew exactly where to build the pits, we could start mining tomorrow. Right? So we got no permitting problems. What we don't know exactly and what we need to do some drilling for is to find out the best place to put the pit, the open pit, right?
Yeah.
So we're doing some exploratory holes now. We started in September. It's winter now, so we'll start again in March, April. And we'll just expand out. So that will only take about 3 or 4 months. We'll optimise the pit design, and then we go straight in and excavate. We do need to do a couple of things first. We need to build a road around the deposit. At the moment, when we're drilling, we've got to call in the helicopter, lift the drill rig to where it goes, and move it. Yeah. So we'll need to build a road. Not expensive, about $1 million, especially with the excavators and everything that's already there with the airport. Because they had to build a 3-kilometre runway, so they had to excavate basically half a mountain. So that's all very exciting. We hope to start the construction of the mine early next year.
Gotcha. And the rare earths in focus, there's so many that sort of fall under that umbrella term. What's the sort of indication already about sort of the allocation, or which ones have you got a prevalence of in this sort of potential deposit?
That's a very good question. That's just what we're asking the Department of Defense in the US. I'm going to Washington in the next few weeks. They've already introduced me to Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin have definitely said they want gallium, especially now with the ban of sale from China, but there's terbium.
Yep.
Very, very important. DY, I can't pronounce it. I could just call it DY. There is a lot of light rare earths, which is 90. That's more captured by the Chinese. But there are one Australian company, Linus,
yes,
recently got $1 billion from the Australian government, and there's MP Materials in the United States. MP Materials crazily send their product to China, and the US buys it back as a thing. So what the US really needs is a processing plant. And with a steady supply of material from Greenland, now they can look at building a processing plant somewhere in the States. And that's what my negotiations and talks with the US government and their subcontractors, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, SpaceX, to find out where best to build a processing plant and what are we going to process. Because we have terbium, we have DY, we do have NdPr, we have zirconium. So we've got all these minerals on our deposit.
But again, they're all processed slightly differently and require different techniques for each.
For us, what's the most maximised profits? But it might be, for example, zirconium, but the demand for zirconium might not be as high as it is for gallium, which we've just found on our ground, or terbium. So that process will take a while. But what we want to do is get the mine up and operating, right? And the processing side of it can wait because there are byproducts in our material which we can sell and run the mine profitably.
Interesting.
The byproducts, yeah.
And have you got an idea, again, talking about the scale, when this comes onto the market, what percentage of rare earth supply could this potentially have?
Yeah, look...
and I assume US want almost exclusivity of it to sort of diversify.
And the EU. Look, the EU are very interested as well. And sometimes the EU, and especially coming up with Trump, maybe there's going to be a lot of tension. So they might want to process it themselves. And they've got a processing plant in Norway that uses a different technology, but it looks like it's working. But the ideal for the EU, if we decide to go that route, is build the plant in Iceland. I don't know if you know, but most of the world's aluminum processing is done in Iceland because of the geothermal power. It's very cheap. So we can build, and that's a day trip by boat from our deposit, straight out of the fjord, straight to one day it will take. So that's another option if we decide to go to the route of taking EU money rather than US money. So there's lots of options open up to us. Number one, what is the best bang for the buck? How much? Because I'm a public company, I've got to look after my shareholders, right? So necessarily, what's in the best interest of the US Defence Department is not necessarily in the best interest of my shareholders. Mm-hmm. So I've got to come to a point where, okay, terbium, yes, we can make this much money on terbium. There's so much demand through the DoD, through their defence contractors. This is what we're going to do. Mostly terbium with maybe some byproducts of niobium and zirconium, something like that. So that mix we've got to work out with our offtake partners, whoever they are going to be.
And you've already had sort of preliminary discussions with, you mentioned SpaceX before. I don't know if you've got sort of anything like that.
SpaceX,
but is it looking at predominantly the sort of aviation industry and then some of the
defence industry? Yeah. So the only one I've actually talked to is Lockheed Martin. Yeah. And they're very much interested only in gallium.
Okay.
So we're now looking at different. So we're not a chemical company, right? The next stage of us digging it out of the ground, selling the byproducts,
in the future maybe.
So one of my other companies, it happens, not companies, one of my other assets is in critical metals as well. So critical metals owns Greenland. It also owns the Wolfsburg lithium mine.
And where's that?
That's in Austria.
Austria?
Yeah.
Okay.
So why I mention this now is because we're not a chemical company, as I said. So we're partnering with the Saudi government and building the hydroxide plant in Saudi Arabia, right? So we would like to use that model for our Greenland asset, partner with a major chemical company that
has the specialties to know how to do that.
Know how to build a plant, know how to extract all these minerals, and we'd own 50%. So putting my other hat on, Wolfsburg, we'll mine the lithium in Austria. We'll ship it down to Saudi. Our offtake partner is BMW. So once the product is made, the product goes back into Europe. So that's why the Europeans love it, because at the end product. So that's about 10,000 tonnes of hydroxide that they don't have to buy off China. Yeah, because it's sourced out of Austria, even though the plant is in Saudi Arabia. And the main reason for the plant being in Saudi Arabia, it's a petrochemical type chemical process. I mean, you can add this and add that, but in the end, they know how to do that very well. The tax rate is 13% cheaper. The energy costs, 30% of our inputs is energy, and in Europe, it's 25 cents to 30 cents a kilowatt hour. In Saudi, it's 5 cents. So our operating costs have come down 30% by building the plant there. And in the end, BMW don't care as long as they get the product.
Well, I know the EU's got something coming into effect about where, like, tracking the materials that come into it. And I can imagine that having the lithium coming out of Austria is a tick. The interesting bit I'm thinking about is going to Saudi, if that has any impact. But I mean, if BMW's already involved, I'm sure they've got lawyers and teams that have already done their due diligence as well.
They're getting a lot of their oil and gas now from Saudi. So they don't want to upset the Saudis. No, Saudis are very much on their radar to do a lot more business with the EU.
Yeah, and they're also pivoting, knowing that the oil and gas industry it's still going to be prevalent for a while. I don't think it's going to phase out as quickly, but being able to pivot skill sets with the electric vehicles and the demand for that.
I don't think a lot of people realise that until 2050, 90% of the world's energy is going to come from fossil fuels. Yeah, it's not going to stop. As energy production, as energy usage goes up, production has to go up, and the wind's not going to blow any faster, the sun's not going to shine any brighter, and for 60% of the developing world, they can't afford those luxuries.
New age technology.
They can't. They're all going coal. I mean, China built one coal-fired power station a week. They built 50-odd last year. They're not going to stop building it.
I think they're still classified as a third world, so therefore they don't have to comply with the top line sort of.
So when you're looking at that, and when you're looking at an EV, in the end, they're powering it off fossil fuels.
Yep.
And they
The
will be
irony
for a
of
long
it,
time.
yeah.
And it's 7 years before they become carbon neutral. Now, I'm not dissing EVs. I think they're fantastic. The performance, the look, the styling, and that's what people want cars for. Some people just A to B. But the main advantage is pollution in cities. So Shanghai, Beijing, Bangkok, all these.
Vietnam, I think they've got a giant electric vehicle company coming in now that's absorbing the whole market.
Absolutely fantastic for that. But you can't tell. People are smart now. You can't say it's carbon neutral. It's not. It's 7 years. And the biggest problem EVs have got, obviously, is what do you do with the batteries?
Yep.
As soon as there's a solution to recycling those batteries, number one, whoever invents it is going to be a trillionaire.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been looking all around the world for different recycling techniques, and none of them at the moment work. But these Teslas are now getting to be 7, 8, 9 years old, and they need new batteries.
Yeah.
Right,
and the whole dilemma comes up that a lot of people go, the second-hand retail value is negligible. And it's like, I alluded to like an iPhone. By the time it's 2 or 3 years on, it's cheaper to get a new phone than it is to get a new battery. Yep. And that's just the consumer mindset.
Yep.
So there's all this, not just the batteries, but the entire sort of shell of the car becomes, well, what do you do with it?
Yep. So, it's an interesting one. I mean, I'm in the lithium market, but, I always... tell the truth, because if you don't tell the truth, because there's so many facts out there now, people are realising it's not carbon neutral, but there are so many health benefits to having an EV in those sort of cities that are clogged up. There's not much wind coming through. Perth's not so much a problem here because we've got the Fremantle doctor obviously pushing it away. But, the more EVs on the road, long term for health, pollution-wise, it's a must. But it's not carbon neutral. I'm not going to pretend it is going to be carbon neutral with the ICE car, internal combustion engine car, for 7 years. That's about the trade-off.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have realised that because the messaging was very much that, it was going to happen overnight and everyone had this assumption, I've got an electric vehicle, I'm doing better for the environment. But the raw materials and the mining and all the fossil fuels required to keep it running on a good day.
5 times more copper.
Yeah. And we haven't even, I'm sure you've probably got some interesting things in copper as well. But going back to what the outlook now looks like for mining, I think, and a lot of people have noticed that now that Trump is president for 4 years, there's this almost... looming idea that he's going to do things that leave his legacy and help put US back as the powerhouse economy of the world. And you can already see how global leaders are reacting for good and for bad. What do you think is really going to happen within the US, changes that's going to have trickle-on effects to companies and also jurisdictions like Greenland and potentially that said a referendum maybe on the cards if that happens?
He can change things quickly in a couple of areas. One's going to be oil and gas. I got no doubt by the time his term ends, US will be the largest producer of oil and gas in the world again, like it was in 2020, until Biden unwound most of his. So that's a hydrocarbon industry. I think coal will have a little bit of a resurrection, especially in West Virginia area where he's got a lot of support. So I think coal will again take not a centre stage for it, but a position. One thing that I think Trump will do is really help the nuclear power industry. He's got a couple of powerful allies. Bill Gates, he's got this technology now where you can, it's the size of a house.
The fusion reaction, almost in like a shipping container size thing.
Yeah, so I think that will be a big industry in the next 4 years, and I think uranium stocks have reacted to that already, anyone that's got nice uranium deposits. But I think the thing about general mining in the states is the states do have a lot of power, and some of these states are controlled by Democrats, and they'll never get mining permits, no matter what Trump does at the federal level. So I don't think general mining, I don't think they'll get a lot of big permits up and running. Oil and gas, uranium aside, and coal, I don't think, because I think in that state the Republicans are in power. So in the Republican states, I think you'll see it, but a lot of the really good minerals, gold, for example, are in Democrat states. So, yeah, he's going to have trouble convincing a separate government that's against his policies. Like, look at WA.
Yeah.
We got those beautiful uranium assets, and then
5 with licenses that are mining.
McGowan comes in and just bans it. I had one myself. I mean, we lost 60 million market cap in one day.
Yeah. That's with Cauldron?
Cauldron Energy, yeah. So, it's difficult for him, other than the big ones that I've mentioned, for him to direct states to change policy when they're a separate party.
So then going forward, this particular project in Greenland is centre stage, and you referred to before, you've got multiple different hats. From a personal note, how do you manage all these different positions, projects, not to mention time zones, and just working across all these different jurisdictions and different almost adoptions and ways they handle mining?
Yeah, look, I never, ever needed much sleep. I only sleep 4 hours a day, if that. It is difficult being in Perth running US companies and well, I've got one in Canada as well, so the same. It is difficult time zone wise. I do travel a lot. I'm only in Perth about 100 days a year, so that helps. But I end up living on aircraft a lot. But yeah, I don't need a lot of sleep. But the trick is having good staff.
Yeah.
I'm chairman of these companies, exec chairman of 3 of them, non-exec of 1. But I've put in very, very good staff. So each particular company has a managing director, and they do a bulk of the work. My main aim is to facilitate, get the money in the door, so these guys can spend it wisely. The trick is to have really good staff in place, a succession plan in each company. So if God forbid my plane crashes, there's going to be someone that knows everything to do with the company. So don't need much sleep myself, and key staff.
And has this been I can imagine, a growing and learning experience over your 40 years doing mining projects and working within these markets? And what has been the sort of key foundation learning? Like, is it just finding good people? And then the $1 million question is how?
Yeah. So I get shown at least 15 projects a week, right? And with those projects, some are interesting, some are not. And then you get to meet the people promoting the project. And, it's just, I suppose, all of the projects I've liked, I've taken, but I've taken the people with me, right? Because they're promoting it, they've been there. Most of them are geologists or metallurgists or geophysicists that have come across pieces of ground or developed a project themselves, but they can't get to the next level. You don't want to buy a project and just stick the existing staff that you've got onto it. Why lose the history, like with Greg Barnes, right? So Greg came to me last year, said he's run out of money. What do I do? And I said, well, we'll take you out, but I want you. You're going to have to
You know everything about this ground.
You've been living
everything
there
about it
for 20 years. Why would I just buy you out
and let you go on your merry way?
Correct. So here's $5 million, but I'll give you 10% of my company, which is valued at $1 billion, right?
Yeah, skin in the game, and then also
So I know that you're going to continue working hard because you want that share price to go up, but I'm not losing any of the history. And a lot of people have, I suppose, egos, and they just want to buy the project and try and run it all themselves. They don't know the nitty-gritty, right? Greg knows the lady at the coffee shop in Cockatock. So every time he walks in the door, every time everyone goes and he gets what he wants. And that's just a little example, but you can imagine that with the engineers there, with all the fuel suppliers there.
So he knows the community, knows the people.
Correct.
It's not just a flash in the pan for him.
Never
it's
ever lose the history of the project. So don't go in there and buy a project and just put in your own stuff. You're not going to get the end result that you want as quickly as you want. So don't lose the history.
Do you feel that's part of the reason why so many junior explorers fail, or some of the other companies struggle to take those projects to the next level? Because I know over the last 4 years, it's not been an easy run for any of the junior explorers.
Yeah, that's one reason. The other reason is, you've got to be able to show, and I do that incessantly in my companies is that you raise $1, you've got to spend at least 70 cents in the ground. And when you see a company, and when I did the metrics when I was a fund manager, if it was anything below 50, he wouldn't even look at it. But, between 50 and 70, look at it still. Why is they spending so much outside of exploration? But usually my target was always 70%. And you'd be surprised how many companies run at below 50% of their money that goes into the ground.
Yeah.
Right, so you've got to really be careful. And I think that's why a lot of juniors do not succeed, is because of that ratio.
And going forward now, you touched on uranium and also copper. I don't know what your sorts of thoughts and opinions might be on that, but have you got any sorts of interesting projects or things on your mind with that? Because I've been a copper bull for a while. I was in uranium ages ago as well. Especially in Australia, uranium's a very difficult one. And WA, as you said, is no, they're not even on the cards really. But copper, I'm curious about your thoughts there.
I was at the Future Metals Conference in Saudi, and one of the interesting speakers was a Rio Tinto guy. And I didn't know this fact. He said, since copper was first used 3,500 years ago, we've used 700 million tonnes of copper. I go, oh, that's an interesting fact. And he said between now and 2040, we'll use another 700 million tonnes of copper. So that puts that in perspective. So in the next 15 years, we're going to use as much copper as we did in the last 3,500 years. Where are we going to get it from? So look, I'm a big copper bull as well. I think copper will have its shine second half of this year going forward. Hence, we sold one of our producing iron ore mines, and we're going to concentrate on copper. One of my smaller companies, CUFE, C-U-F-E, and that's in the Northern Territory. You said earlier what some of the drawbacks. I've told you what's the drawbacks in the US with different state governments. The drawbacks here are obviously the ban on uranium in WA and Queensland. I think that's going to be lifted in Queensland now. There's a government there. It hasn't happened yet, but I think it will. Another big issue for us is native title, and another issue is environmental. You saw that one that Tanya Plibersek knocked back in when everyone else said it was okay. Even the state Labor government said it was okay, and that she overruled it. So they're the things that hold back Australian projects. We're lucky with our Northern Territory copper deposit. It's an existing mine. I never buy anything greenfields. Never. Always brownfields. So someone's done work on it. It's proven. You just got to do the development type work.
So it's already been partially de-risked instead of just going out and trying to stake it and find something.
So I think we've got somewhere around 600,000 ounces of gold in the deposit, and the copper's going 1.2% or something like that. So that one is going to be quite a nice little project in a mining town, Tennant Creek. So so very interesting. So I'd look at the copper, uranium, all the rare earths. There's so many left to fill ones. Helium is another one that's come across my desk recently. I'm seriously looking at it. There's not enough helium.
Yeah, well, I know last year one of the surprising realizations, I think it was antimony, was one of the highest performing sort of resources for 2024. And
rhodium. Rhodium's another good one. So there's a lot of left field ones that you look at. The cost of production, obviously, is one thing you've got to really look at when you're looking at something that's out of the box. But look, I don't put anything off. I don't put any jurisdiction off, although I think off camera we mention Africa and corruption. There's some dangerous things happening there with the arrest of the Resolute MD. He had to pay a tax of over 100 million, I believe it was, to get him out and start their operations. So there's a lot of things happening in some of these countries. Burkina Faso now has just nationalised all the gold. Tanzania did it a few years ago. It's difficult dealing in countries where the rule of law can change with the change of government. Yeah, and we lost a deposit in Sierra Leone 9 years ago now, We spent $100 million developing a fantastic iron ore asset, and 2 days later, after we got our mining approval, the license was taken off us and given to a Chinese company.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. And AZR, which was a $3 billion company, right? So there are lots of things.
A very large lithium deposit.
Yeah, and they're still going through the courts. You very rarely win in a court in the country where the president has taken the license off you.
Yeah.
Right? There's no use fighting even. It's some of these jurisdictions that I was very willing to go into 10 years ago. I'm very reluctant to go into now.
Well, it is incredibly fascinating, that whole political side of it. The more that I've spoken with people in mining, and even when you look to the West, you look at America, as you said, like there's jurisdictions that are going to be pro and some that aren't. And, Africa and US, complete polar opposites in the way that a project might be stopped. But really, it's all pending on whoever's in power, potentially whoever's getting money, and it all comes down to that. But it's so quickly how, the US, now with this election, the pivot is so apparent. And now there's an interest in, again, investing in US mining in certain jurisdictions and the tentacles outside of that, like Greenland, just because it's a flip, which I go, how do you ever think this far ahead and you can't predict.
You can't.
But try and de-risk and hedge yourself from something like this happening.
Yeah, you can't. And you say, I say Africa, but, damming is, we just mentioned it, Tanya Plebiscite, one person.
Yeah.
One person can make that decision. Didn't go through cabinet, apparently. We find out because they were shocked. It's just amazing that can happen in a Western country. But in the US, it's a lot different. The litigation in the United States is huge. I just noticed looking at YouTube this morning that 13 of his executive orders have been now in court by the Democrats, saying that they were illegal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 13 of, I don't know which ones, I just saw the headline. So, so even his executive order can be challenged.
Yeah.
Right? So, it does happen in first world countries as well. It's happened in Australia very recently with Tanya and the gold mine. So it can happen, but, I'd rather deal in these districts than in Africa at the moment.
And you said earlier, again, you've had this incredible success rate of finding, developing projects, selling them. And for most, and you speak with a lot of entrepreneurs and people that are great at doing this, you go, well, why, when's enough? When do you stop? What's the drive? And for you, 4 hours of sleep, I'm sure you've got to find 20 hours to fill your day, and otherwise you just go crazy. What continues to drive you to keep looking for these things? And is it just the general love of making this next discovery and the itch that this has?
Yeah, look, a lot of people have vices. Some people have alcohol, some people do drugs, some people have gambling. Mine is doing deals. And it's a drug of my choice, I suppose. It just lifts me. It just makes me excited, makes me want to get up every day. And given that I'm chairman of 4 companies, I'm doing deals on all of them at the moment. It's exciting. I couldn't think of doing anything else. I've got quite a few mates that are retired, and when we have catch up, they're talking about their golf handicap.
I was actually going to say it's going to be related to golf,
or how many fish they caught. I've never played a game of golf, and I've never fished. Horses for courses.
Yeah,
they don't understand why I do it either, and I do it because I love it.
Have you ever dabbled outside of mining and resources? We said at the beginning, Perth, there's not really much else here. But have you ever dabbled outside of it? I know there was a bit of a stint with football.
A bit of a stint. It cost me $48 million. It was a passion.
Yeah.
So you do have passions, right? I was in radio, for example. We had the largest reach of the radio network in Australia. It was called Red FM. We went from New Caledonia right up to Papua New Guinea, all of Australia. We went up via satellite. That was very interesting.
When was that?
2001. I bought it for $200,000. I sold it to WA newspapers for about $12 million in a year and a half later because we took a lot of their advertising revenue.
Far out.
So it was called Red FM. So the idea from the founder was you couldn't get radio out in the mine sites, maybe just the ABC. If that, and some of them didn't even have ABC. So he did a deal with Optus, got the satellite going. Unbeknownst to him, the reach Optus had was that lot big, and he was just aiming at the WA market. But we were picked up everywhere. And the beauty about that, it was unregulated because it wasn't part of the Broadcasting Act, because we didn't have a broadcast license, we had a satellite license.
Interesting.
Very interesting. So straight away, he ran out of money and was in a lot of debt. So I basically took over his debt. And anyway, all I'll say is the advertising that we could do that none of the others could do was very interesting. I'll just use the word interesting. And revenues just exploded.
And purely because it wasn't a broadcaster, it was satellite.
Yeah. And then all the FM stations here had paid hundreds of millions for their license, were just crazy. And we had so many things going through Parliament, through ministers, to the guy that was in charge of regulating this. And, we were unregulated. And they couldn't do anything about it. It was a satellite service. And all they could do is put blockers in Perth. But still, some people in Perth could listen to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was directed at the
the mines and the sort of
so
remote
I saw an
areas.
opportunity, and the reason I did it is it was called Red Dust Radio, and it was on one of our sites, and then all of a sudden it went off, and that's because the guy couldn't pay his satellite bill, and investigated, found out why, and took over the business by paying off some of his debt, and It was interesting. So I was a media mogul.
Jeez, and now you're doing podcasts with me.
for 18 months. But that was a very interesting one. I've owned and operated gyms before when I was younger. What else have I done? I had a nightclub, the old Onyx Bar in West Perth. That was very successful. Perth Fashion Festival, did that for 14 years. I had a friend that was very passionate, and she needed some help funding it, so I funded it, and it became so successful. It was really good until COVID hit, and unfortunately that year we'd already paid, already ordered the pavilions and had to be made, which is the biggest expense. It was about $600,000, and then COVID hit. We couldn't have crowd or anything, so obviously
2 years almost worth of
went into liquidation, unfortunately, but
So again, with all the successes, there's also been the failures.
Yeah. And the biggest one on mining was Sierra Leone. We spent $100 million there. The share price was booming. We were ready to start mining. The railway line was built through another company, but we had an arrangement, and then they just stopped. Took the license off us for no reason.
And then how, more from a mental and getting over it point of view, how did you deal with that situation in particular? Having that news almost hit your door, I can imagine anger, frustration, where's a wall to punch?
Well, the worst thing is it was in the same company as our success that we had with the Chinese, and I think it was $340 million cash we got up front. I paid $240 million back in dividends. No junior had ever done that before. Right, so all the shareholders are happy. They got their money plus 10 times, and then you go into another asset, and through no fault of the company, we lose our license. And social media is brilliant in one way, but it can also be just soul destroying in another, because during those years after that happened, it's just negativity.
Yeah.
So you just keep going, and Cape Lambert turned into Cyclone. Cyclone now got the biggest magnetite deposit in the world, one of the biggest, 15.3 billion tonnes in Canada. It's doing very well. We've just signed an MOU with Vale.
For those that don't know, that's a massive iron ore company. Yeah.
So, it swings and roundabouts. It's just, when you're on the downswing, the criticism can come thick and fast. And I've been criticised. I had too many chairmanships. I shouldn't have had Perth Glory. It took up too much time. I never ran Perth Glory, ever. I put in CEOs. They run the company. The coach runs the team. I just help raise the money, raise the profile of the club. We had Robbie Fowler. We had Daniel Sturridge, William Gallas play for the club. We had Manchester United come here, Chelsea come here and play us. So I lifted soccer, football in this state to a brand new level, where the government now is supporting the Matildas. They get a game here. They're doing a lot for football. Yeah. That never was the case before. So, I've done my job. It's hopefully the next person's job to keep that going. I'm still very passionate about the club. But it has freed me up because I was one an owner that actually turned up. I mean, there's 3 owners that have never been to a game in Australia from overseas clubs. Yeah, it's crazy that they would own a club and not come out. But and I only missed 2 home games ever in my 18 years of owning the club. So I was very proud, but very financially unsuccessful.
From the conversation today going forward, what would you urge investors, potential investors, shareholders, people looking at markets and more broadly how economies are working? What would be some of the key points to consider and remember?
It's going to be a very tumultuous year coming up. Trump is a disruptor, and the biggest disruptor we've seen, even from his first term. I think he's learned a lot of mistakes from his first term, and so the disruption is going to affect everybody, like tariffs, for example.
Yeah.
What's going to happen if China puts a tariff on the US? Will they say, "Oh, Australia is a ally of the US. Maybe we should put a tariff on Australia as well"? Who knows? This is the biggest uncertainty. So you've got to be able to put your investments in something that is like a hedge. So, I mean, I've got a bit in gold.
Yeah,
it's always a hedge. I mean, it hit record 4,500 an ounce Aussie, and that's why I'm really keen on my Kufi company because it's got copper and gold, and I'm very, very excited about. It's got a mining license. We just got to get some approvals, but again, the regulatory side in Australia now has become a lot tougher to get a mine up and operating. So. But I've never been an advocate of crypto, ever. I've always been very wary of it. I like assets that are assets.
Tangible.
Yep. But there's always a but when you're talking about investments, and this is going to a whole different community than I'm used to, I presume, this podcast. So I'd give that a tick because Trump and his team are very determined to use...
well, they want to make America one of the homes of crypto. Yeah.
So, but Bitcoin itself, if they manage to get that passed and hold in their reserves, Bitcoin.
I think the US government already does hold a fair amount of BTC that most people aren't aware of.
But make it policy, right, and make it a percentage so everyone knows and calculates how much it's going to be. Bitcoin's going to go well. But as you say, and I was going to mention that next, the whole regulatory framework for not only crypto, but for coins as well. I mean, Trump's family themselves have made quite a bit of money.
The Trump coin.
Yeah, a couple of coins that have gone out there at the moment. I although, and I admit it, I've talked to a lot of people that I've been against crypto for a long time. That's one thing I got wrong, and I admit when I get things wrong. But I do see a future now if Trump manages to get that policy through and percentages out there. So because once he does it, he won't go back down on it. Yeah. So you'll know that 5% or 10% of the reserves will be held in Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, I think it is currently. Bitcoin's market cap is higher than silver accumulatively. It's well and truly in the top 10. And it gets to a point where you can't necessarily ignore that from a fundamental point of view.
Yeah, so I'd be remiss in just keeping it to mining. There are also a lot of technology plays out there. I'm loving to learn about DeepSeek, more about it, and see how they've managed to do it at a fraction of the cost.
A tenth of the price for the high-end processing.
Yeah, so that's going to be very, very interesting. And I believe it's open source, so they should be able to replicate that anywhere else in the world.
Well, it really kicked NVIDIA quite harshly on the NASDAQ, but
600
it
billion.
just showed that, these higher powerful processing chips and everything that they're doing isn't necessary to get better results, which really spooked a lot of people. Yeah. I think they've rebounded since because, 20% drop for NVIDIA is a pretty good buying opportunity for others. Yeah. But the AI, the high processing computer stuff, again, all is going to require critical minerals and resources, but simultaneously energy, but just the power and how that's going to change the business landscape. I'm sure you might have dabbled with some of the AI tools and just seeing how that's going to improve efficiencies to another level.
We use it a lot, especially report writing, which can become tedious, becomes quite...
and I'm sure other people use it to summarise it and get a shortened and more precise account of it.
No, it is good. But so I'm not just a one-trick pony in mining. I see many opportunities in crypto, many opportunities in tech as well. But the crypto and tech all end up needing raw materials. And the raw materials you do need are the rare earths, copper, and the hedge for me is gold.
Yeah.
Have a little bit in gold. That's where I would go.
Well, I appreciate it, Tony. This has been an incredibly interesting conversation. I knew when I was going to speak with you there was going to be a lot of different avenues to explore, just given that you've got your hands in so many different areas and you've just done it for so long. So I appreciate you coming on for one of the days that you're here in Perth. It's one of the 100. But when you're next here, and I'm sure there's just going to be this continuous rolling of announcements and news. It'll be good to touch base again and see what's evolving because, as I said, this year's going to be impressive, but there's 4 years of the Republicans in power in the US and there's just going to be some instrumental changes. So, thank you for coming on the show and speaking with me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. Please remember that the topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial advice. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, share, and follow. You can follow the Market Bull on all our socials and keep up to date with global market insights.